The trash compactor behind the Sterling estate sounded like snapping bones, but those were my custom silks and my late mother's sweater being crushed. Watching from the second floor, I saw Victoria toasting the woman replacing me while they purged my closet. They forget I control every single milligram of medication they take to maintain their facade. They think I am weak, but tonight at the charity gala, I am going to teach them a visceral biological lesson. My name is Kelsey Hartman, and until 3 hours ago, I believed that competence and loyalty were currencies that held value in the Sterling household. I was driving my silver Volvo down the winding, tree-lined roads of Greenwich, Connecticut, feeling the bone-deep exhaustion that only comes after a solid week of corporate posturing. I had spent the last 7 days in a windowless conference center in Boston, representing Biovanta Solutions at the annual Pharmaceutical Innovation Summit. I had secured 3 new contracts and successfully navigated a compliance audit that would have sunk a lesser pharmacist. But as I turned onto the private drive leading to the Sterling estate, none of that felt like a victory. It just felt like I was returning to a second job, one where the hours were 24/7 and the pay was essentially zero. The iron gates of the estate were open, which was the first sign that the rhythm of the house was off. Usually, Victoria, my mother-in-law, kept the perimeter sealed tighter than a biohazard lab, but it was what lay just inside the gates that made me slam on my brakes. A mountain of black plastic trash bags sat by the curb, waiting for the private sanitation service that came on Friday mornings. It was Thursday afternoon. The pile was obscene, a chaotic mound that rose nearly to the height of the stone wall. It looked like the aftermath of a demolition, or perhaps a crime scene. I idled the car, frowning. The Sterlings did not do clutter, and they certainly did not leave garbage out in plain sight a day early. I was about to ease my foot off the brake when a flash of color caught my eye. It was peeking out of a tear in one of the bags near the bottom of the heap, a distinct, vibrant teal. My heart hammered a strange, erratic rhythm against my ribs. I knew that color. I knew that texture. It was cashmere, double ply, soft as a cloud. It was the scarf my mother had knitted for me 2 winters before she passed away from ovarian cancer. She had spent months on it when her hands were already shaking from the chemotherapy, knitting love into every uneven loop. I threw the car into park and scrambled out, leaving the door open. The autumn air was biting, but I did not feel the cold. I ran to the pile, my heels clicking frantically on the asphalt. I grabbed the teal fabric and pulled. The bag ripped open further, vomiting its contents onto the pristine driveway. It was not just the scarf. It was my life. There lay my beige trench coat, the one I had bought with my first paycheck from Biovanta. Underneath it was the navy blue blazer I wore to medical conferences. Tangled in the sleeves was my favorite silk blouse, now wrinkled and stained with coffee grounds from a leaking bag above it. I ripped open the next bag. My sneakers, my jeans, my hooded sweatshirts, the books from my nightstand. I stood there in the driveway, clutching the teal scarf to my chest, breathing in the scent of wet leaves and impending disaster. This was not a mistake. You do not accidentally pack up an entire wardrobe, double knot the bags, and drag them to the curb. This was an eviction of my identity. I got back into the car, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. I drove the remaining 200 yards to the main house, the gravel crunching loudly under my tires like grinding teeth. The manor loomed ahead, a sprawling structure of gray stone and ivy that always felt more like a museum than a home. I stormed through the front double doors, ready to demand an explanation, but the words died in my throat. The foyer was different. For 5 years, a massive oil painting of Preston and me, commissioned shortly after our wedding, had hung above the mahogany console table. It was a traditional portrait, perhaps a bit stiff, but it was us. We looked happy, or at least, I looked hopeful, and Preston looked proud. That painting was gone. In its place hung a massive, aggressive piece of modern art. It was a chaotic splash of black and crimson paint on a white canvas, violent and nonsensical. It looked like a blood spatter analysis gone wrong. Mrs. Hartman. I spun around. Arthur, the estate manager, stood by the entrance to the dining room. Arthur was a good man, a man who had silently handed me tissues when Victoria's barbs made me cry in the pantry, a man who always ensured my car was warmed up on snowy mornings. But today, he looked ill. His face was a pale shade of gray, and he was wringing his hands together, a nervous tic I had never seen in him before. "Arthur," I said, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the cavernous hall. "Where is my wedding portrait, and why are my clothes in the trash at the gate?" Arthur looked down at his polished shoes. "I am so sorry. Mrs. Hartman, truly, I tried to store them in the boxes, but Mrs. Sterling insisted. She said," he swallowed hard, "she said the sanitation crew is coming early tomorrow for a special pickup." "She threw out my things," I asked, the reality sinking in like a lead weight. "Where is she?" "She is in the drawing room, madam, with the guest." "What guest?" Arthur did not answer. He just stepped aside, his eyes filled with a pity that made my stomach turn. I did not want his pity. I wanted answers. I bypassed the drawing room and headed straight for the stairs. I needed to see the extent of the damage. I needed to see my sanctuary. If they had touched the foyer, what had they done to our bedroom? I took the stairs 2 at a time, ignoring the burning in my calves. The house was silent, a heavy, suffocating silence that felt insulated by money and secrets. I reached the master suite on the 2nd floor and threw the double doors open. I stopped dead. It was like walking into a stranger's room. The room smelled different. Gone was the faint, clean scent of my lavender linen spray. In its place was a heavy, cloying perfume, something floral and aggressive, like tuberose and musk. My vanity table was gone. The simple oak desk where I reviewed patient files and worked on my research was gone. My side of the walk-in closet door was wide open, revealing bare shelves. Not a hanger, not a shoe, not a single hairpin remained. It was as if I had never existed. But the room was not empty. Occupying the center of the room, right at the foot of the 4-poster bed, were 6 massive steamer trunks. They were Louis Vuitton, the hard-sided kind that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. They were stacked with arrogant precision, blocking the view of the fireplace. Stamped on the leather luggage tags, in gold-embossed letters, was a name that made my blood run cold. Bianca Rouse. I stared at the name. I knew it. Of course. Everyone in the financial world knew the Rouse family. Texas oil money, billions of dollars in assets, a political influence that stretched from Houston to Washington, D.C. But why was her luggage in my bedroom? "I see you found the upgrades." The voice drifted from the doorway, cool and smooth as polished glass. I turned slowly. Victoria Sterling stood there, leaning against the doorframe. She was 60 years old, but looked 40, thanks to a team of surgeons and the precise cocktail of vitamins and hormones I had spent 3 years perfecting for her. She held a flute of champagne in one hand, her fingers dripping with diamonds that caught the afternoon light. She was wearing a cream-colored silk lounge suit that probably cost $5,000, and she looked at me with the same mild distaste she usually reserved for a server who brought her the wrong vintage of wine. "Victoria," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and confusion. "What is going on? Why are my clothes in the garbage? Who is Bianca Rouse? And why is her luggage in my room?" Victoria took a slow sip of her champagne, savoring the bubbles before answering. She walked into the room, trailing the hem of her silk pants over the carpet I had picked out. "Oh, Kelsey, don't be so dramatic," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Bianca is not just a who. She is the daughter of Carter Rouse. You know, Rouse Energy. We are finalizing a merger that is going to expand the Sterling portfolio significantly. Bianca is here to oversee the transition. She will be staying with us for a few weeks." "A few weeks?" I repeated. "So she stays in the guest wing. Why is her luggage in my bedroom, and where are my things?" Victoria laughed. a light, tinkling sound that lacked any warmth. The guest wing is being renovated. Darling, the dust is simply unbearable. And really, this is the master suite. It has the best light, the best view. Bianca is accustomed to a certain standard of living. We could hardly put a rouse in the blue room. Could we? She walked over to the Louis Vuitton trunks and ran a manicured hand along the leather. As for your things, she continued, her tone hardening. I had to make space. Let us be honest. Kelsey, your wardrobe was distressing. All those poly blends and sensible shoes, it was visually cluttering the space. Bianca has brought her gala gowns, her furs. She needs room to breathe. You cannot expect me to hang high fashion next to whatever it is you buy off the rack. You threw away my mother's scarf, I whispered. The anger was rising now, hot and sharp, choking me. You threw away everything. Oh, stop it, Victoria snapped. I did not throw everything away. The sentimental trash went to the curb, yes, but the rest of your serviceable clothing is in the basement storage. You know, the room next to the boiler. It is a bit damp, so I would suggest you move it soon if you do not want mildew. But really, take it as an opportunity to upgrade, though I suppose on a pharmacist's salary. Your options are limited. She looked at me with a smirk, waiting for me to break. She wanted tears. She wanted me to scream so she could call me hysterical. She wanted me to beg. Where is Preston? I asked. Victoria's smile widened. She gestured vaguely toward the corner of the room, near the heavy velvet curtains that led to the balcony. He is right there, darling. He has been helping Bianca settle in. I turned. I had not seen him at first, shadowed by the drapes. Preston was standing there, still wearing his tennis whites, a sweater draped casually over his shoulders. He looked like the picture of the American dream. The handsome, wealthy husband I had fallen in love with 5 years ago, but he was not looking at me. He was staring intently at the pattern on the rug. His hands jammed deep into his pockets. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for his mother to sweep up the shards. Preston, I said. He flinched, physically flinched at the sound of my name. Hey, Kelsey, he mumbled, still addressing the floor. Hey. I stepped closer to him. That is all you have to say. Your mother threw my dead mother's scarf in the trash. There is another woman's luggage at the foot of our bed, and you say hey. It's just business. Kels, he said, his voice pleading but weak. He finally looked up, but his eyes darted away the second they met mine. The Rouse deal. It is huge. Dad needs this. We all need this. Bianca just needs to feel comfortable. It is only temporary. Temporary, I repeated. So I am supposed to sleep in the basement with my mildewing clothes while you play host to an oil heiress in our marriage bed. Preston grimaced. Well, not the basement. The guest room downstairs is fine. The one behind the kitchen. It's quiet there. The servants' quarters, I corrected him. You are moving me to the old servants' quarters. It is just until after the gala, Victoria interjected. Stepping between us, she placed a hand on Preston's arm, claiming him. Bianca needs Preston's full attention for the preparations. They have a lot of public appearances to coordinate. You understand, don't you? Kelsey, you are always so busy with your little pills and your patients. You do not have the time or the pedigree to handle the social demands of a merger like this. We are actually doing you a favor. I looked at them. I looked at Preston, the man I had nursed through panic attacks, the man whose reputation I had polished, whose family secrets I had kept. I looked at Victoria, the woman whose hypertension I managed, whose vanity I supported with customized compounds. They stood there, united in their cruelty, shielded by their money and their delusion. They thought I was broken. They thought that by stripping the room of my physical presence, they could erase me. They thought that by moving me to the servants' quarters, they could reduce me to a servant. A strange, cold calm settled over me. It was the same calm I felt in the emergency room when a patient was crashing. The emotions, the hurt, The shock, the betrayal were boxed up and shoved into a deep corner of my mind. My pulse slowed. My vision sharpened. I looked at the Louis Vuitton trunks. I looked at the glass of champagne in Victoria's hand. I looked at the slight tremor in Preston's left eyelid, a sign that his anxiety was spiking and he would be needing his Xanax soon. They had thrown out my clothes. They had desecrated my mother's memory. But they had forgotten one thing. I was the one who filled the pillboxes. "Fine," I said. My voice was steady, void of the tears Victoria had been hoping for. Victoria blinked, surprised by my sudden capitulation. "Fine. Yes," I said. "I understand. Business is business. I will go collect my things from the basement and move into the downstairs guest room." I turned my back on them before they could see the look in my eyes. I walked out of the master suite, leaving the heavy scent of Bianca Rouse's perfume behind me. I walked down the stairs, past the abstract monstrosity in the foyer, and headed toward the kitchen door that led to the basement. As I descended into the damp darkness of the cellar, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a scientist who had just identified a pathogen, and I knew exactly how to treat it. They wanted to play a game of appearances. Fine, but they had forgotten that while they focused on the exterior, on the clothes and the parties and the public image, I was the master of the interior. I controlled the chemistry of their bodies, and the gala was only 3 days away. The basement guest room smelled of damp earth and neglect, a sharp contrast to the sterile, antiseptic scent of the hospital corridor where I first met Preston 5 years ago. Sitting on the edge of the lumpy mattress, surrounded by the few boxes I had managed to salvage from the damp storage, my mind drifted back to that beginning. It was easier to live in the past than to look at the water stains on the ceiling above me. I was 26 years old then, a clinical pharmacist at Apex Health, the most exclusive private medical facility in New England. I was not just counting pills behind a counter at a drugstore. I was on the floor, working directly with physicians to manage complex drug therapies for patients who could afford to buy islands but could not buy health. That was where I found Richard Sterling, Preston's father, recovering from a near-fatal interaction between his blood pressure medication and a trendy herbal supplement he had picked up in Bali. Preston had been standing in the hallway, looking like a lost child despite his bespoke suit. He had that particular look of wealthy men who are suddenly confronted with a problem that money cannot instantly fix. He was terrified. When I walked out of Richard's room, clipboard in hand, Preston looked at me as if I were an angel descending from heaven. I explained the pharmacology to him, breaking down the hepatic enzyme inhibition in a way that was clear, authoritative, and calming. I saved his father from liver failure that day. Preston asked me to dinner the next night. I fell for him because he seemed different from the other men in his circle. He seemed soft, malleable, and genuinely in awe of my intelligence. He told me he was an investor, a venture capitalist looking for the next big thing in biotech. I believed him. I believed that he was a man making his own way in the world, just burdened by a famous last name. It took me 6 months of marriage to realize that Preston Sterling did not invest money. He merely moved it around. He was a trust fund baby, entirely dependent on the monthly allowance doled out by the family estate. His office was a country club, and his business meetings were rounds of golf where nothing was ever decided. But by the time I understood the reality of his financial impotence, I was already wearing his ring and living in the guest wing of the Sterling estate. Waiting for the house he promised we would build together. That house never materialized. Every time I brought it up, there was an excuse: the market was down. The trust was frozen. His mother needed him close. The Sterling family was old money, in America. That means they did not talk about cash. But they judged you entirely on where yours came from. My money came from work. I earned a salary in the mid-6 figures. I had paid off my student loans. I had a 401k. To me, I was successful. To the Sterlings, I was hired help that had somehow wandered into the family portraits. There is an invisible wall in high society between those who are served and those who serve. Despite my marriage license, I never crossed that wall. I was the medical girl. At dinner parties, Victoria would introduce me to her friends not as her daughter-in-law, but with a qualifier. This is Kelsey. She works in pharmaceuticals. The tone always implied I was selling illicit substances on a street corner rather than managing life-saving therapies. They despised my job, yet they consumed my expertise with a voracious, selfish hunger. That was the core of our dynamic, the rot at the center of the apple. They looked down on me for working in healthcare, yet they demanded I function as their private, on-call concierge doctor. It started small. A question about a rash here, a request to check a sore throat there. But soon, it became my second, unpaid full-time job. I became the gatekeeper of the Sterling family's physical survival. I thought about Victoria, upstairs right now in her master suite, probably looking at her reflection and worrying about a microscopic wrinkle. Victoria Sterling was a woman governed by two forces, vanity and hypochondria. She was terrified of aging and terrified of dying, in that order. She spent thousands of dollars a month on supplements, hormone replacement therapies, and experimental wellness treatments imported from Europe, but she did not trust doctors. She thought they were judgmental. She did not trust nurses. She thought they were spies who would sell stories about her health to the tabloids. She only trusted me, not because she respected me, but because she owned me. In her mind, I was a utility, like the heating system or the Wi-Fi. I was there to ensure her biological machinery ran smoothly so she could focus on being the queen of Greenwich society. Every Sunday night, for 5 years, I performed the ritual. I would sit at the marble island in the kitchen, the only room in the house where the lighting was clinical enough for my work. Spread out before me would be the amber vials, the blister packs, the glass jars with labels in German and French. For Richard, it was cardiac maintenance, beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, statins. He had a heart condition that was a ticking time bomb, held in check only by the precise titration of his dosage, which I monitored. For Preston, it was the chemistry of cowardice. He took selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors for his generalized anxiety, and benzodiazepines for his panic attacks, the panic that set in whenever his mother raised her voice or his father threatened to cut his allowance. He popped Xanax like breath mints, and I was the one who rationed them, ensuring he did not slide into addiction or overdose. I managed his refills, spoke to his psychiatrist, and smoothed over the jagged edges of his psyche with chemical precision. And then there was Victoria. Her regimen was a masterpiece of pharmaceutical excess. She took 30 pills a day, high-dose biotin for her hair, resveratrol for anti-aging, thyroid medication to keep her weight down, a specialized diuretic to prevent water retention so she could fit into her couture gowns, melatonin and valerian root for sleep. A mood stabilizer she claimed was for hormonal balance, but was actually to keep her narcissism from tipping into full-blown mania. I was the only one allowed to touch the pill organizers. These were not the cheap plastic boxes you buy at a pharmacy. Victoria had commissioned custom organizers made of sterling silver and mother of pearl. Engraved with the days of the week, they looked like jewelry boxes. Every Sunday, I would open them. Click, click, click. The sound was the heartbeat of my servitude. I would sort the pills with tweezers, ensuring no cross-contamination. I checked expiration dates. I researched interactions between her newest miracle supplement from Switzerland and her blood pressure medication. I saved her from serotonin syndrome twice. I caught a dosage error from her private concierge doctor that would have stopped her heart. When I pointed these things out, did they thank me? No. Victoria would simply nod and say, "Well, that is why you are here, Kelsey. It is the least you can do, considering you live under my roof." They saw my devotion as a tax I had to pay for the privilege of being a Sterling. They assumed that because I was a pharmacist, I enjoyed serving them. They never understood that it was love for Preston that drove me to care for his parents. And it was professional ethics that kept me from letting them accidentally poison themselves. I looked at my hands, resting on my lap in the dim light of the basement room. These hands had compounded creams for Victoria's eczema. These hands had measured liquid suspensions for Richard when he could not swallow pills after his stroke scare last year. These hands had held Preston's head while he dry heaved from a hangover, feeding him electrolytes and anti-nausea medication. And how did they repay me by treating me like a shameful secret? I remembered the Christmas party 2 years ago. I had just received a promotion at Biovanta, a massive step up to Director of Clinical Safety. I was beaming. I tried to tell the family during dinner. Richard had looked up from his roast beef and said, "That is nice, dear. Pass the salt." Victoria had not even looked up. She had turned to Preston and asked if he had remembered to call the landscaper. That was the moment I realized that no matter how high I climbed in my world, I would always be at the bottom of theirs. I was the educated help, useful, necessary, but ultimately disposable. They thought I was trapped. They looked at my student loans, which were gone now, though they did not know that, and my middle-class background, and they assumed I would tolerate any humiliation just to stay adjacent to their wealth. They thought I was dependent on their money, when in reality, their physical existence was dependent on my competence. The irony was suffocating. They obsessively curated every aspect of their lives, their clothes, their art, their public image, yet they handed over total control of their internal biology to the woman they openly despised. They swallowed whatever I put in those silver boxes without a second glance. They swallowed it because they were arrogant. They believed they were untouchable gods, and I was just the priestess whose job it was to keep the temple clean. But gods can fall, and temples can crumble. I stood up from the mattress, the dampness seeping through my jeans. I walked over to the small, high window that looked out at ground level. I could see the wheels of the catering trucks arriving for the preparations for the gala. They were bringing in cases of champagne, trays of caviar, towers of macarons. They were preparing to feed the ego of the Sterling family, but on Sunday, I would be feeding them something else. I thought about the chemistry of the human gut. It is a delicate ecosystem. It relies on balance. The Sterlings had disrupted the balance of my life. They had purged me like a toxin. They had treated me as waste to be expelled. It was only fair that I returned the favor. I was not just a spurned wife anymore. I was a clinical pharmacist with 100 years of rage burning in my chest, masked by a modern, professional exterior. I knew the half-life of every drug in their system. I knew their metabolic rates. I knew exactly how long it would take for an enteric-coated capsule to dissolve in the small intestine. The flashback faded, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the present. I was in the servants' quarters. My clothes were in the trash. My husband was upstairs with an oil heiress. But tomorrow was Friday, and Friday was the day I ordered the inventory for the weekly refill. I turned away from the window and picked up my phone. I dialed the number for the pharmacy supply network I used for my private consulting work. My voice was steady, professional, the voice of Dr. Kelsey Hartman, Farm D. "Yes, this is an urgent order," I said into the phone. My eyes fixed on the water stain above me that looked remarkably like a storm cloud. "I need a rush delivery on a few compounds: magnesium citrate, high concentration, bisacodyl, liquid form, and do you have the unflavored polyethylene glycol in stock?" "Yes, the industrial strength. I have a very stubborn case of blockage that needs to be cleared." I hung up the phone and sat back down on the bed. For the first time since I saw my mother's scarf in the garbage, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a surgeon picking up a scalpel. They wanted to treat me like shit, and let's talk about shit. The memories of my submission were over. The era of my dominance was about to begin. The old money was about to meet new science, and the collision was going to be messy. I lay back on the pillow that smelled of mildew and closed my eyes, visualizing the intricate, beautiful chemistry of revenge, the transition from the damp, subterranean air of the servants' quarters to the climate-controlled perfection of the main dining room felt like crossing a border between two warring nations. I had spent an hour trying to make myself presentable using the contents of a cardboard box I had salvaged from the basement storage. My options were limited to a pair of faded black leggings and a gray, oversized cashmere sweater that had seen better days. Smelling faintly of mothballs and cedar, I had no makeup. as my vanity case was currently sitting in a landfill somewhere in Greenwich. I pulled my hair back into a severe bun, looked in the cracked mirror of the basement bathroom, and decided that if they wanted to treat me like the help, I would dress the part. When I entered the dining room, the crystal chandelier was blazing, casting a prism of light over a scene that was so grotesque in its normalcy, it made my stomach turn. The table was set for 4, the fine china, the ones with the gold leaf rim that I had hand-washed after every holiday for 5 years, was laid out. The heavy silver cutlery gleamed, but it was the seating arrangement that made me stop dead in the doorway. At the head of the table sat Victoria, regal and terrifying in a silk blouse. To her right was Preston, looking freshly scrubbed and terrified, and directly opposite Victoria. In the seat that had been mine for half a decade, the hostess seat, the wife's seat, sat Bianca Rouse. Bianca was a visual assault. She was undeniably beautiful in a manufactured way, with skin that looked like it had been airbrushed by God or a very expensive dermatologist. She was wearing a dress that likely cost more than my student loans, a shimmering, backless thing covered in sequins that caught the light with every breath she took. She was draped in diamonds, a tennis bracelet on one wrist, a massive solitaire pendant at her throat, and rings on nearly every finger. She looked like a disco ball that had been granted sentience and a trust fund. There she is," Victoria said, looking up as if I were a tardy waitress. "We were just about to start without you. Sit down. Kelsey, don't hover." She gestured vaguely to the 4th chair, the one usually reserved for guests, placed awkwardly on the side, creating an imbalance in the table's symmetry. I walked to the table, my eyes locking on Bianca. She didn't flinch. She smiled, a wide, predatory grin that showed off teeth that were aggressively white. "Hi," she chirped, her voice an octave higher than necessary. "I'm Bianca. Victoria has told me so much about you. You're the pharmacist, right? That is so quaint. I love that. Very essential worker of you." "Hello, Bianca," I said, sliding into the side chair. "And yes, I am a pharmacist. I ensure people don't die from their own stupidity or biology. It is a full-time job in this house." Preston choked on his water. Victoria narrowed her eyes. "Bianca is joining us from Texas," Victoria said loudly, overriding my comment. "Her father, Carter Rouse, is a very dear friend of the family. Bianca has graciously agreed to help us modernize the sterling image. We are thinking of a rebrand," Bianca added, leaning forward and resting her elbows on the table, a breach of etiquette Victoria would have flayed me for. "Everything here is so charmingly vintage, but the world is moving on. We need fresh energy, fresh aesthetics." She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my pilling sweater. "Speaking of aesthetics," Bianca giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Victoria, you were right. It really is a bit grunge chic, isn't it? Is that what people are wearing in the suburbs these days? It is very struggling artist meets soccer mom." Victoria let out a light, cruel laugh. "Oh, Bianca, be kind. Kelsey has had a rough day. She is in transition. Besides, not everyone understands the importance of presentation. Kelsey prefers comfort over class." "I prefer wearing clothes that I own," I said, cutting into my steak with more force than necessary. "As opposed to having my wardrobe stolen and thrown into a garbage truck." "Recycled, darling," Victoria corrected smoothly. "We are simply curating. You should thank me. I saved you from embarrassing yourself at the gala. Imagine if you had worn that navy blazer. People would have thought you were catering the event." I looked at Preston. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to say that the navy blazer was Armani, that I looked professional in it, that I was his wife. Preston stared at his mashed potatoes as if they contained the secrets of the universe. "The steak is good tonight, Mother," he mumbled. Bianca laughed again, reaching out to touch Preston's arm. Her fingers lingered on his bicep. "Oh, Preston, you are so funny, always focused on the food. just like that time in Cabo. Remember the lobster tacos? You ate 6 of them." The air left the room. I froze, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. "Cabo?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "Preston has never been to Cabo. He hates Mexico. He says the humidity ruins his hair." Preston went pale. He looked at Bianca with wide, panicked eyes, silently begging her to shut up. But Bianca didn't shut up. She smirked, a flash of malice behind her vacuous eyes. "Oh, oops. Did I say Cabo? I meant somewhere else. We have bumped into each other at so many business conferences over the last year. It is hard to keep track." "Preston doesn't go to business conferences," I said, turning to face my husband. "He goes to golf tournaments and investment strategy retreats in Scottsdale." Was the retreat in Scottsdale actually a beach in Cabo? Preston opened his mouth, closing it like a fish gasping for air. It was a layover, a flight diversion. You know how the airlines are. "A flight diversion to a beach resort with lobster tacos?" I asked. "Oh, let it go, Kelsey," Victoria snapped, slamming her wine glass down. "Stop interrogating him. Preston is allowed to have a life. He and Bianca have been working on the merger for months. Sometimes business takes place in pleasant settings. You wouldn't understand. Your idea of a business trip is a Holiday Inn and a conference room full of people discussing generic drugs." The puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind with the force of a car crash. The investment strategy trips, the sudden disappearances. The way the sterling fortune had been hemorrhaging money for 2 years while Preston still bought new watches. They weren't just merging companies. They were merging families. The Sterlings were broke. I knew that from the papers I had found in Preston's office. They were drowning in debt, leveraged to the hilt, and here was Bianca Rouse, the daughter of a Texas oil tycoon, dripping in diamonds. She wasn't a guest. She was the bailout package, and the price of the bailout was Preston. "I see," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I struggled to suppress. "So, this isn't a visit. This is a handover. You are selling your son to the Rouses to cover your debts, aren't you, Victoria? And I'm just the depreciation asset you need to write off?" "You are being hysterical," Victoria said, her voice like ice. "This is exactly why you never fit in. You make everything so personal. This is about legacy. This is about survival. Bianca understands our world. She was born into it. You were an experiment, a rebellious phase. I was the one who kept this family alive," I shot back. "I managed your health. I managed his anxiety. I managed the lies you tell everyone. And you were paid for it," Victoria hissed. "We gave you a roof over your head. We gave you the Sterling name. You should be grateful we let you stay this long." She picked up a small silver bell next to her plate and rang it. The sharp sound cut through the tension. "Dinner is over," Victoria announced. "Preston, Bianca, why don't you go to the drawing room? I believe there is a bottle of cognac that needs opening. Kelsey, clear the table." I blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Victoria said, looking me dead in the eye. "The staff is busy preparing for the gala. We are short-handed. Since you are staying in the servants' quarters, and you are eating the food, you can make yourself useful. Clear the table. Then bring us a pot of Earl Grey and our evening supplements to the drawing room." "I am not your maid," I whispered. "No," Victoria agreed. "A maid gets paid. You are currently a guest living on my charity." I started to stand up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I am leaving. I am going to a hotel." "Sit down," Victoria commanded. Her voice dropped to a low, dangerous register. "You are not going anywhere. You are going to finish this week. You are going to attend the gala, or at least stay out of sight while we host it, and you are going to maintain the facade of a happy family until the ink is dry on the Rouse contract next Monday. Then, we will discuss a quiet, amicable divorce. And if I don't," I challenged, "if I walk out right now and call the Boston Globe, if I tell them the Sterling Empire is a house of cards, held together by debt and infidelity." Victoria smiled. It was the smile of a viper about to strike. Then I make a phone call to the administrator at Sunnyvale Nursing Home, she said softly. My blood ran cold. Sunnyvale was where my grandmother lived. She had advanced dementia. It was the best facility in the state, costing $12,000 a month. When we got married, Richard Sterling had offered to cover the cost as a wedding gift, a gesture of goodwill to welcome me to the family. It was the one thing they held over me. Nana, I breathed. It is such a lovely facility, Victoria mused, twisting the diamond ring on her finger. It would be a shame if the funding suddenly evaporated. I understand the state-run facilities are quite grim, overcrowded, understaffed. They sedate the patients just to keep them quiet. Don't they? I imagine your grandmother would decline very quickly in a place like that. I looked at Preston. He was studying his fingernails, refusing to acknowledge the monstrous blackmail his mother was levying against his wife's dying grandmother. You wouldn't, I said, but I knew she would. Victoria Sterling would burn down an orphanage if it meant saving her social standing. Try me, she said. Now, the tea, and the supplements. Preston needs his Xanax. He looks stressed. I stood there for a long moment. The humiliation burned in my throat like acid. I looked at Bianca, who was watching the scene with the bored amusement of someone watching a reality TV show. I looked at Preston, the coward I had wasted 5 years on. And I looked at Victoria, the architect of my misery. They thought they had won. They thought they had checkmated me with my grandmother's safety. They thought that by forcing me to serve them, they were breaking my spirit. But they were making a critical error. They were handing the weapon directly to the executioner. Fine, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. I will get the tea, and I will get the supplements. Victoria nodded, satisfied. Good girl. Don't take too long. Bianca gets impatient. I turned and walked toward the kitchen. As I pushed through the swinging door, I heard Bianca giggle. She is surprisingly obedient for a pharmacist. I thought she'd have more spine. She knows her place, Victoria replied. She just needed a reminder. I let the door swing shut behind me. The kitchen was empty, the stainless steel appliances gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. I leaned against the counter and took a deep breath, counting to 10. They wanted me to serve them, I would serve them. They wanted their supplements, I would give them their supplements. I walked over to the pantry where I kept the locked medical box. I keyed in the code my birthday, a date Preston probably couldn't remember if his life depended on it. The box clicked open. Inside were the rows of familiar bottles, the vitamins, the minerals, the sedatives, and next to them, the new additions I had brought up from the basement stash earlier that day, the clear, viscous liquid in the unmarked vial, the high-concentration magnesium, the bowel-cleansing agents designed for pre-surgical evacuation. I took down the delicate porcelain teapot. I took down the silver pill organizers. Victoria wanted me to be the servant. She wanted me to be the unseen hand that maintained their well-being. She forgot that the hand that feeds is also the hand that can choke. I prepared the tea, Earl Grey, steeping it until it was dark and rich. Then I opened the pill organizers. Click, Preston's Xanax. Click, Victoria's evening primrose oil. Click, the multivitamin for the guest. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, customized tool I used for compounding. With steady, surgical hands, I began the swap. Tonight, they would get the regular dose. I couldn't risk them getting sick before the gala. The timing had to be perfect. Tonight was just a rehearsal. Tonight, I would serve them with a smile. I would let them gloat. I would let them think they had crushed me under the heel of their designer shoes. But as I placed the pills into the little crystal dishes, I whispered a promise to the empty kitchen. Enjoy your tea, Victoria. Enjoy your diamonds, Bianca, because come Sunday, you are going to wish you had treated the pharmacist with a little more respect. I arranged the tray. I checked my reflection in the oven door. The gray sweater still looked pathetic, but my eyes were dry and hard as flint. I picked up the tray and walked back toward the dining room. I was not a servant. I was a grim reaper in a cardigan, and I was about to deliver the first course of their judgment. The guest room behind the kitchen was less a room and more of a holding cell for unwanted furniture and, apparently, unwanted wives. The air was stagnant, heavy with the smell of dust and the lingering grease from the industrial ovens on the other side of the wall. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, the springs groaning under my weight, staring at the wall-mounted intercom panel. It was an archaic system, installed in the 1980s, a relic of a time when the Sterling estate actually had a full staff to summon. Usually, the system was dormant, a yellowing piece of plastic blending into the beige wallpaper. But tonight, a tiny red light pulsed steadily in the corner of the panel. Someone in the main house had keyed the all-call button and forgotten to toggle it off. The channel was open. Static hissed, followed by the distinct clink of crystal against a coaster. Then, Victoria's voice filtered through, tinny but unmistakable. "The prenuptial is ironclad. Arthur, I made sure of that 5 years ago. But you know how these things are. She could drag it out. She could make noise." I froze. The breath caught in my throat. I stood up and moved closer to the speaker, pressing my ear against the cold plastic. "She won't have the resources to make noise if we move quickly," a male voice replied. It wasn't Preston. It was smooth, oily, and familiar. It was Harrison Thorne, the family's longtime attorney. "The strategy is simple. Victoria, we don't file for divorce based on irreconcilable differences. We file based on incapacitation." "Explain," Victoria commanded. "Kelsey works in high-stress pharmacology," Harrison continued, his voice sounding like he was discussing the weather. "She has access to controlled substances. We paint a picture of instability, the erratic behavior, the mood swings. We claim she has been self-medicating. If we can get a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation, or better yet, an emergency hold, her credibility is shot. She won't be able to contest the separation terms if she is fighting to keep her license." My hands curled into fists so tight my fingernails dug into my palms. They were planning to gaslight me legally. They were going to use my career, the career I had built with blood and sweat, as the weapon to destroy me. "And she has been looking tired lately," Victoria added, a cruel amusement in her tone. "I can testify to her outbursts. Just this evening, she was ranting about lobster tacos and threatening us. It sounded quite paranoid." "Perfect," Harrison said. "We document everything. By the time we serve her the papers, she will look like a hysterical addict." The door to the room they were in must have opened, because the sound of footsteps echoed through the speaker. Heavier steps. "Preston." "Is it done?" Preston asked. His voice was slurred. The Xanax and cognac cocktail doing its work. "Did you tell her about the timeline?" "We are discussing the exit strategy." "Preston," Harrison said. "But we need to be realistic about the urgency." "Why the rush? A standard divorce takes months. Why do we need her out in 2 weeks?" There was a pause, a heavy, pregnant silence that seemed to vibrate through the wires. "Because Bianca is late," Preston muttered. My heart stopped. It literally felt like the organs ceased to beat for a full second. "Late?" Harrison asked. "She is 8 weeks along," Preston confessed, his voice dropping to a whisper that the intercom barely picked up. "She took a test this morning. A digital one. It said pregnant. If we don't get married in a month, she's going to start showing. You know the Rouses. They are conservative Texas Christians. If Bianca has a bastard child, her father cuts her off. And if he cuts her off, we lose the merger," Victoria finished sharply. "And we lose the house." The reality washed over me like a bucket of ice water. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just a fling. Preston had created a new life with this woman while I was still folding his laundry and filling his pillbox. "So," Victoria said, her voice regaining its steel, "we accelerate. Kelsey needs to be gone, and she needs to be discredited. I want her out of this house immediately after the gala. Monday morning. We change the locks." "And the clothes?" Harrison asked, sounding confused. "Arthur mentioned you had the staff throw out her entire wardrobe. Legally, that is destruction of property. If she pushes back, Victoria laughed. It was a sound that belonged in an asylum. Oh, Harrison, do not be so pedestrian. That wasn't about property. It was about energy. I had my feng shui master. Master Chen, no. Wait, not Chen. It was Master Lin come in yesterday while she was at work. He said the master suite was blocked. He said Kelsey's energy was stagnant. Too much earth. Not enough fire. He said her belongings were anchoring the bad luck to the house. That is why the stocks have been dropping. It wasn't the market. Harrison, it was her cheap polyester absorbing the prosperity. I stepped back from the intercom, staring at it in horror. They hadn't thrown out my clothes because they needed closet space. They hadn't thrown them out because they were ugly. Victoria had thrown out my life because a spiritual charlatan told her my existence was bad for her stock portfolio. It was medieval. It was superstitious narcissism masquerading as sophistication. It was a cleansing, Victoria declared. We burned sage, we threw out her things, and we moved Bianca in to bring the gold energy. And look, it worked. We have an heir on the way. The connection clicked off. The red light faded. I stood in the silence of the servants' room, trembling. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was the adrenaline of a soldier who has just seen the enemy's map. They were going to frame me. They were going to destroy my reputation. And they were doing it all to protect a fetus that was worth more to them than my 5 years of devotion. I needed proof. I needed leverage. I looked at the digital clock on the bedside table. It was 2 a.m. The house would be asleep. Preston would be passed out from his sedatives. Victoria would be under the influence of her melatonin and valerian root. I slipped out of the room. I didn't wear shoes. My socks were silent on the cold tile of the kitchen floor. I moved like a ghost, a phantom in the house that had rejected me. I crept up the back staircase, avoiding the creaky third step I had memorized years ago. The house was a tomb, dark and silent. I bypassed the master suite where Bianca and Preston were presumably sleeping in the bed I had made and headed for the library at the end of the hall. This was Preston's home office, a room he used mostly for drinking scotch and watching golf. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. Preston never locked anything because he never believed anyone would dare intrude on his space. I slipped inside and closed the door softly. Not daring to turn on the light, I used the flashlight on my phone, keeping the beam low. The room smelled of expensive leather and stale cigar smoke. I went straight to the mahogany desk. It was a chaotic mess of papers. For a man who claimed to be an organized investor, Preston lived in administrative squalor. I began to sift through the piles. The first thing I found was a letter from the bank. It was opened, crumpled, and smoothed back out. Notice of default. I scanned the document. It was for the mortgage on the estate. They were 6 months behind. 6 months. The amount due was staggering over $200,000 in arrears alone. I dug deeper. There were letters from the IRS regarding unpaid capital gains taxes. There were notices from credit card companies, the Platinum Amex, the Black Card all maxed out. Then I found the binder. It was tucked under a stack of Golf Digest magazines. It was labeled Rouse Merger/Liquidation Strategy. I opened it. My eyes widened as I read the summary. The Sterling family wasn't just cash poor. They were insolvent. Their assets were leveraged 3 times over. The investment firm Preston ran was essentially a Ponzi scheme of personal loans paying off other loans. The plan outlined in the binder was simple and desperate. Marry Bianca Rouse. Use her dowry and infusion of $50 million disguised as a business partnership to pay off the immediate debts. Then, slowly liquidate the Sterling assets while living off the Rouse fortune. They were parasites. They were looking for a new host because they had sucked the current one dry, and I was the dead skin they needed to shed. But the final blow, the one that turned my heart into a block of absolute zero ice, was a single bank statement sitting on top of the shredder, waiting to be destroyed. It was from our joint savings account, the account where I deposited my bonus checks, the account we were saving for the future house. I shone the light on the transaction history. October 12th. Tiffany Company. $15,000. October 20th. Louis Vuitton, $8,000. November 1st, the Plaza Hotel, $4,000. He had drained it. He had taken the money I earned, the money I saved while he played pretend investor, and he had used it to woo Bianca. The diamond pendant she was wearing at dinner, I bought that. The luggage sitting in my bedroom, I bought that. The hotel room where they conceived their gold energy baby, I paid for that too. I lowered the phone. The darkness of the room seemed to press in on me, but I didn't feel small. I felt enormous. I was a pharmacist. I dealt in cause and effect. I understood the mechanism of action. The Sterling family was a pathogen. They were a virus that consumed resources, destroyed healthy tissue, and replicated by infecting new hosts. They had infected me, and now they were moving on to Bianca Rouse. But a virus has a weakness. If you alter the environment, if you introduce a shock to the system, the host can expel it. I took out my phone and began to photograph everything. The mortgage default, the IRS letters, the liquidation plan, the bank statement showing the theft of my funds. I took clear, high-resolution images, ensuring every number and date was legible. Then I put everything back exactly as I found it, the crumpled letter, the binder under the magazines. I walked out of the library, my steps steady and sure. I wasn't going to sue them. Not yet. Lawsuits took years, and lawyers like Harrison Thorne knew how to bury the truth in paperwork. No, I needed something faster, something immediate, something that would strip away their dignity in the same way they had stripped away mine. They wanted to claim I was unstable. Fine, I would show them stability. I would show them the unshakable, relentless consistency of chemistry. They wanted to talk about purging bad energy. I would give them a purge they would never, ever forget. I returned to the basement room, but I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, visualizing the gala. I thought about the physiology of the digestive tract. I thought about the pharmacokinetics of bisacodyl and magnesium citrate. I thought about the way the drugs would interact with the alcohol they would inevitably be drinking. The pain of the betrayal was still there, a dull ache in my chest where my heart used to be, but covering it was a layer of professional detachment. I was the doctor now, and the patient needed a very aggressive course of treatment. Friday morning arrived with the manic energy of a hive that had been kicked. The Sterling estate was overrun. Florists were hauling in massive urns of white hydrangeas and imported orchids, their stems thick and green, smelling of hothouses and money. Caterers were shouting instructions in Italian, wheeling in stainless steel warming ovens that looked like morgue drawers. In the center of this chaos, I moved like a ghost in my gray sweater, invisible and irrelevant, yet seeing everything. I was in the kitchen, pretending to brew coffee. When Victoria swept in, she was wearing a silk kimono that probably cost more than my first car, and she was trailed by Bianca, who was scrolling through her phone with a look of intense boredom. "Kelsey," Victoria said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "There you are. I have been looking for you. We need to discuss the protocol for Sunday." "I thought I was confined to the servants' quarters," I said, not turning around. "Am I allowed to discuss protocol?" "Don't be petulant," Victoria snapped. "This is important. The gala on Sunday is not just a party. It is the official debut of the Sterling Rouse partnership. Bianca needs to look radiant. Preston needs to look vigorous. And I need to look immortal." She tapped her fingernails on the granite countertop. "I want you to prepare a special regimen for us. A booster. You know, that cocktail you made for Richard before the governor's ball last year, the one with the B12, the caffeine, and the collagen peptides. We need that. We need to be glowing, high energy, clear skin, maximum vitality." I turned slowly, resting my hip against the counter. I looked at Bianca, who was now examining a microscopic hangnail. I looked at Victoria, whose eyes were wide with the desperate need for validation that only artificial chemicals could provide. "You want the Radiance Protocol," I said, using the name I had jokingly given it years ago. "High-dose antioxidants, metabolic stimulants, and a mild diuretic to reduce bloating. Exactly, Victoria said, clapping her hands once. But make it stronger. Double the dose. We have to shine. Kelsey, the cameras will be high definition. I cannot have puffy eyes or sluggish energy. I want us to vibrate with health. And when do you want to take this? I asked, my mind already beginning to calculate the variables. We will take it at the brunch on Sunday morning. Of course, Victoria said. No, I corrected her, my voice dropping into its professional register. If you take it in the morning, the peak effect will wear off by the time the speeches start at 8 in the evening. You will crash. If you want to peak during the gala, you need to take the loading dose exactly 2 hours before the event starts, 5 in the afternoon for the initial round, and a second booster at 6:30. Victoria frowned. Considering this, she trusted my science implicitly, even as she despised my person. Fine. You prepare the doses. Set them out on the silver tray in the drawing room. We will take them before we go down to the ballroom. I'll need to go to the pharmacy, I said. I'm out of the pharmaceutical-grade resveratrol and the specific peptide binders you like. Take the black card, Victoria said, waving her hand. Oh, wait, no, Arthur has the card. Just use your own money and bring me the receipt. I will reimburse you. I almost laughed. Reimburse me? Like she had reimbursed me for the $15,000 Preston stole from our savings. Consider it my contribution to the cause, I said. I left the house 20 minutes later. I did not go to the chain drugstore in town where everyone knew the Sterlings. I drove 40 minutes to a compounding pharmacy in Stamford, a place where I was known only as Dr. Hartman, a serious professional with a valid license and a pristine record. The air inside the pharmacy was cool and smelled of rubbing alcohol and peppermint. It was a scent that usually calmed me, grounding me in the logic of chemistry. Today, it smelled like opportunity. I did not buy resveratrol. I did not buy collagen. I walked to the aisle that held the gastrointestinal aids. I wasn't looking for the gentle stuff. I wasn't looking for the daily fiber supplements or the mild softeners. I was looking for the nuclear option. I selected 4 bottles of magnesium citrate. It is a saline laxative, drawing water into the intestines to create a powerful, undeniable urge to evacuate. It works fast, and it works violently. But the liquid form is sour and hard to hide. I needed the concentrated powder form, the kind used for industrial bowel prep before major abdominal surgeries. Then I moved to the stimulant laxatives, bisacodyl. 5 milligrams is a standard dose. 10 milligrams is aggressive. I bought 3 boxes of the 5 milligram tablets. These don't just soften. They stimulate the nerve endings in the colon, forcing the muscles to contract. Hard, rhythmic, unstoppable. Finally, I grabbed a bottle of furosemide from behind the counter. I had a standing prescription for it for occasional edema. It is a loop diuretic. It makes you urinate. A lot. And fast. I paid cash $82.50. I didn't want a paper trail on my credit card. And I certainly didn't want Victoria to see a receipt for colon cleanse extreme when she asked for her reimbursement. I drove back to the estate, the bag on the passenger seat beside me. I felt a strange vibration in my hands. Not fear, but the high-frequency hum of precision. I was about to perform a very complex experiment. I bypassed the main house and went straight to the basement. The guest room I was staying in had a small kitchenette, but I needed privacy. I set up my workspace on the small desk in the corner, turning on the single gooseneck lamp. It was time to cook. I laid out my tools, a mortar and pestle, a small digital scale that measured down to the milligram, a set of empty gelatin capsules size 0, clear, and a syringe. First, the beauty vitamins. These were usually golden capsules filled with fish oil and vitamin E. I took the legitimate bottle Victoria kept in the pantry and brought it down. I carefully opened 12 capsules. I drained the oil into the sink. Then, I took the bisacodyl tablets. I placed 30 of them into the mortar. That is 150 milligrams of active stimulant. A normal person takes 5. I ground them into a fine, white dust. I mixed this dust with the magnesium citrate powder. The magnesium would draw the water. The bicycle would force the contraction. It was a binary weapon. One prepped the battlefield, the other launched the attack. I carefully filled the empty gelatin capsules with this white powder. They looked innocent. They looked like collagen. They looked like purity, but I wasn't done. Victoria wanted a liquid booster as well, something to drink for immediate energy. I took the small glass vials I used for her energy shots, usually. This was a mix of green tea extract and ginger. Today, I brewed a concentrated solution of the polyethylene glycol, the tasteless, odorless powder that turns the contents of the human stomach into water. I dissolved it in a small amount of warm water until it was perfectly clear. Then I added a drop of yellow food coloring and a dash of lemon extract. It looked exactly like her vitamin shot. It smelled like lemon, it tasted like lemon, but chemically, it was a tidal wave waiting to happen. Now came the math. This was the most critical part. I sat back and looked at the digital clock. Pharmacokinetics is the study of how a drug moves through the body: absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. Magnesium citrate, in liquid suspension, has an onset of action between 30 minutes and 3 hours, but mixed with a stimulant like bisacodyl in a fasting stomach, and I knew they wouldn't eat much before the gala to fit into their clothes, the absorption would be rapid. If they took the pills and the shot at 6:30 in the evening, the capsule would dissolve in the stomach within 15 minutes. The powder would enter the small intestine by 7 o'clock. The magnesium would begin pulling water from the bloodstream into the gut immediately. By 7:30, they would feel a rumble, a little gurgle. Nothing alarming, just digestion. But at 8 o'clock, 8 o'clock was when the speeches began. 8 o'clock was when the peristaltic waves, the muscular contractions of the colon, would hit peak intensity. It would not be a gentle urge. It would be a physiological imperative. The sphincter muscles, no matter how much willpower they possessed, would be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of fluid and the violence of the contractions. And the diuretic, I crushed the furosemide into the mix. That would kick in around the same time, ensuring that their bladders were just as compromised as their bowels. I looked at the 3 piles of pills. 1 pile for Victoria. She was smaller, older. I adjusted her dose slightly, adding more magnesium, less stimulant. I didn't want to kill her. I just wanted her to lose control. 1 pile for Preston. He was bigger, but his constitution was weak. He had a nervous stomach. I gave him the full dose. The Xanax he would inevitably take would actually relax his muscles further, making it even harder for him to hold it in. It was a cruel interaction, but poetic. 1 pile for Bianca. She was pregnant. I paused. I am a healthcare professional. I have ethics. I looked at the bisacodyl. It is a Category C drug. Not recommended for long-term use in pregnancy, but a single dose. It causes cramping. It causes distress. It does not cause miscarriage. It just causes misery. I thought about the baby, the heir they were celebrating. I decided to leave the diuretic out of Bianca's pile. Dehydration was a risk I didn't want to take with a pregnancy, but the laxative. Oh, she was getting the laxative. The cramping would mimic labor pains. It would terrify her. It would make her think, for one heart-stopping moment, that she was losing the golden ticket, and then, when the reality set in that it was just diarrhea, the humiliation would be that much sharper. I finished filling the capsules. I polished them with a soft cloth so they shone under the lamp. I placed them into the silver pill organizers I had stolen back from the kitchen. Sunday, evening. Then, I prepared 1 last dose. This one was for me. Victoria would expect me to partake. You need to look presentable too, Kelsey, even if you are in the background, she would say. She would watch me take my pill to ensure the batch was safe. She was paranoid like that. I took 3 empty capsules. I filled them with sugar, just plain, white, granulated sugar from a packet I found in the kitchenette. I marked my pill box with a tiny scratch on the bottom, invisible to anyone but me. I sat back and looked at my work. It was a masterpiece of deception. 12 capsules, 3 vials of liquid. They looked like salvation. They were actually destruction. They want to get rid of everything of mine, I whispered to the damp walls of the basement. I will help them. I will help them get rid of everything they are full of. I packed the kit away. I cleaned the mortar and pestle until it was sterile. I wiped down the table. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep well. I dreamed of tidal waves and crumbling dams. I dreamed of Victoria Sterling standing on a stage, opening her mouth to speak, and having nothing but mud pour out. Saturday passed in a blur of activity. I stayed out of the way, helping the florists, directing the lighting crew. I played the part of the obedient, cowed wife. I saw Preston a few times. He looked through me. He was already gone, mentally living in his new life with Bianca. Sunday morning dawned bright and cold, the day of the gala. The house was vibrating with tension. Victoria was snapping at the maids. Bianca was complaining about her dress fitting too tight. Little did she know how much looser it would feel by the end of the night. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Victoria summoned me to the drawing room. "Is it ready?" she asked. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair already done in an elaborate updo. "Yes," I said. "The protocol is prepared. It is on the silver tray in the pantry. I suggest you take it at 6:30 sharp, right before you put on your gowns. That way, the glow will hit you exactly when you walk onto the stage." "Excellent," Victoria said. She looked at me, her eyes critical. "And you? Have you taken yours?" "I will take mine with you," I said. "Solidarity," Victoria sneered. "Solidarity, that is a rich word coming from you. Just make sure you stay out of the photos. Kelsey, tonight is about the future, not the past." "Understood," I said. I walked back to the pantry. I looked at the tray. The silver boxes gleamed. The little glass vials of yellow liquid caught the light. I checked the time. 4:15, 2 hours and 15 minutes until ingestion. 4 hours and 15 minutes until detonation. I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was a balancing of the scales. They had taken my dignity, my home, my husband. I was simply giving them a physical manifestation of the rot that was already inside them. I picked up the tray and carried it out to the sidebar in the drawing room, placing it right next to the crystal decanter of scotch. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the mice to get hungry. Sunday morning in the Sterling household always carried a specific weight, a mixture of religious obligation and social anxiety. But today, the air was pressurized enough to crush a submarine. The estate was not waking up. It was mobilizing for war. The gala of the season, as the local papers had dubbed it, was 12 hours away, and the house was a hive of frantic, high-priced activity. I had been up since 5 in the morning, not because I couldn't sleep, but because Victoria had texted me a list of imperative tasks that read like a writer for a demanding rock star. Check the orchid hydration levels. Confirm the valet parking insurance. Ensure the ice sculptures are not melting. I moved through the hallways like a specter, dodging caterers carrying trays of canapes and florists, wrestling with massive arrangements of white lilies that smelled like a funeral home. By 11 o'clock, the brunch was served in the solarium. It was a light meal poached salmon, egg white frittatas, and sliced melon designed to provide sustenance without bloating the stomach before the evening's couture gowns were zipped up. I was not eating. I was standing by the sideboard, tasked with the final preparation of the Radiance Protocol. Victoria sat at the head of the glass table, wearing a silk dressing gown that shimmered in the morning sun. Bianca was to her right, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and scrolling through Instagram. Preston was picking at his food, looking pale and jittery. "Kelsey," Victoria called out, not looking up from her tablet. "Is the cocktail ready? We need to start the absorption process now if we want to peak for the red carpet." "It's ready," I said. My voice was calm, almost melodic. It was the voice I used when explaining side effects to a patient who wasn't listening. I picked up the silver tray. On it were 4 crystal glasses filled with the yellow liquid, the lemon-flavored polyethylene glycol solution I had prepared in the basement. Next to each glass was the small silver pill box containing the vitamin capsules, the magnesium citrate, and bisacodyl bombs. I walked to the table. I placed the first glass and box in front of Victoria. For maximum absorption, I said, reciting the instructions I had invented. You need to drink the entire glass first, then take the capsules immediately. Do not sip. The peptides need to hit the stomach lining all at once. Victoria nodded solemnly. She picked up the glass. You see, Bianca, this is the secret. Japanese collagen and Swiss stem cells. It costs a fortune, but it takes 10 years off your face. I placed the second set in front of Bianca. She looked at the yellow liquid with suspicion. Is it gross? She asked, wrinkling her nose. I have a very sensitive palate. I can't do chalky. It tastes like lemon water, I assured her. Very refreshing, and it's excellent for clearing the complexion. Well, I do want to glow, Bianca said, picking up the glass. I saw the guest list. The photographers from Vogue are coming. I need to look perfect. Finally, I placed the last set in front of Preston. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot. Thanks, Kels, he mumbled. I feel like garbage. My stomach is in knots. This will help, I said. A dark truth hidden in the lie. It will settle everything. Just drink it down. Preston, all of it. I took the fourth glass, the one with the sugar pills and plain lemonade, and stood at the end of the table. To the future, Victoria proclaimed, raising her glass. To the merger, Preston echoed weakly. To me, Bianca added with a grin. They drank. I watched in fascination as the liquid disappeared down their throats. I watched their Adam's apples bob. I watched Bianca wipe a drop of lemon water from her lip. I watched Preston swallow the 3 large capsules with a grimace. They had done it. The payload was delivered. The biological clock had started ticking. Not bad, Bianca said, setting the glass down. A little tart, but I can feel it working already. Is that possible? I feel lighter. That is the electrolytes, I lied smoothly. It hydrates instantly. You know, Kelsey, Bianca said, leaning back in her chair and looking at me with a smirk. You really are good at this, mixing potions, fetching drinks. It suits you, much better than trying to be a socialite. She laughed, a cruel, high-pitched sound. In fact, she continued, after the wedding, when I move in permanently, maybe we can keep you on. I'll need someone to manage my prenatal vitamins. I'll pay you. Of course. Minimum wage plus tips. You could be like a personalized nurse, but you'd have to wear a uniform. I think that would be cute. Preston chuckled. He actually chuckled. He took a sip of his water and smiled at his mistress. She is good with the details. I will give her that. The rage flared in my chest. Hot and white, but I clamped it down. I looked at Preston. I looked at the man I had loved, the man I had protected, the man I was currently poisoning with 80 milligrams of high-grade laxative. I don't think that will be necessary, I said quietly. I have other plans. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Oh, don't be proud. Kelsey, it is a generous offer, but let's focus on tonight. What are you wearing to the gala? Or are you planning to lurk in the kitchen in that gray sweater? I'm not coming, I said. The table went silent. Victoria looked at me, her eyebrows raised. Not coming, she repeated. But you have to be there, to manage the things. To hold my purse, to make sure Preston has his mints. I have nothing to wear, I said simply. You threw out my clothes. Remember the feng shui cleansing? I can hardly attend a black tie event in leggings and a cardigan. It would disrupt the gold energy. Victoria stared at me for a moment. Then a slow, satisfied smile spread across her face. You are right, she said. You would look like a stain on the evening. It is better this way. Stay here. Stay out of sight. You can oversee the cleanup crew when the party moves to the after-hours club. Smart girl, Bianca added. Know when you're beaten. Go organize the pantry or something. Make yourself useful. I will, I said. I'll be very busy. Good, Victoria said. Standing up. Now, everyone, to your rooms. Rest, hydrate, makeup and hair arrive at 2. We need to be perfect. They filed out of the solarium. leaving me alone with the empty glasses. I looked at the residue of the yellow liquid at the bottom of Victoria's glass. "Perfect," I whispered. I cleared the table, washing the glasses myself to remove any trace of the polyethylene glycol. Then I went downstairs to the servants' quarters, but I did not organize the pantry. I reached under the bed and pulled out a flat black box I had hidden there the night before. I opened it. Inside lay a gown of deep, shimmering emerald green silk. It was vintage, elegant, and cut to kill. I had bought it from a high-end consignment shop in the city on Friday. Using the cash I had stashed in my emergency fund, the fund Preston didn't know about. Next to the box was my passport and a one-way ticket to Paris. Departing from JFK at 11:30 tonight, I checked the time. It was noon. The gala started at 6. The speeches were at 8. I had 6 hours. I spent the afternoon in a strange state of calm. I took a long shower in the servants' bathroom. I shaved my legs. I did my nails with a bottle of deep red polish I had bought at the pharmacy. Upstairs, I could hear the chaos. I heard Bianca yelling at a hairdresser because her curls were too tight. I heard Victoria screaming about a wrinkle in the tablecloth. I heard Preston pacing the floorboards above me. At 5 o'clock, the music started. A string quartet was setting up in the ballroom. The first guests would be arriving soon. I dressed slowly. I slipped into the emerald gown. It fit like a second skin. I put on the pair of diamond earrings I had managed to save from the purge, my grandmother's earrings, which I always kept in my purse, not my jewelry box. I pinned my hair up in a sleek, severe chignon. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't Kelsey the pharmacist. She wasn't Kelsey the doormat wife. She was something else entirely. She was the antidote. I packed my small carry-on bag, just the essentials, my laptop, my documents, the hard drive with the photos of the financial records. I waited until 6 o'clock. The house was now full of people. The hum of conversation drifted down from the main floor. The gala had begun. I picked up my suitcase and walked to the back door of the kitchen, but I didn't leave, not yet. I had a front row seat to the main event, and I wasn't going to miss the opening act. I slipped my phone out of my pocket and opened the app connected to the security cameras in the ballroom. I had installed the system myself 3 years ago when we had a break-in scare. Victoria had forgotten I had the admin codes. On the small screen, I saw them. They looked magnificent. Victoria was in gold, shining like an idol. Bianca was in silver, looking every bit the billion-dollar heiress. Preston was in a tuxedo, smiling that charming, empty smile. They were circulating, shaking hands, laughing. They looked healthy. They looked radiant. I checked my watch. 6:15. The magnesium was moving through the small intestine. The bicicotal was dissolving. The pressure was building. "Tick-tock," I whispered. I walked out of the servants' entrance and into the cool evening air. I circled around the side of the house to the terrace doors that led into the ballroom. I wasn't going to go in yet. I was going to wait in the shadows of the garden, watching through the glass. I wanted to see their faces when the first wave hit. I wanted to see the exact moment when the sterling facade cracked wide open. The sterling ballroom was a masterpiece of manufactured elegance, a glittering aquarium where the sharks of Connecticut society swam in rivers of champagne. From my vantage point in the shadows of the terrace, peering through the French doors like an uninvited ghost, I could see the sheer scale of the deception. Over 200 guests filled the space senators, hedge fund managers, tech moguls, and the vultures of the society press. They were all there to witness the coronation of the Sterling Rouse Alliance, unaware they were about to attend a biological demolition derby. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and even more expensive ambition. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, flattering glow over the crowd, but on my phone screen, the high-definition security feed told a colder, sharper story. Victoria was holding court near the ice sculpture of a swan. She was wearing a gold Dior gown that clung to her frame, a testament to months of starvation and the radiance protocol I had provided. She looked imperious, her head held high, soaking in the adoration of her peers. but every few seconds, I saw a subtle shift in her posture, a slight wince, a hand moving unconsciously to her abdomen before quickly smoothing down the silk of her dress. Standing next to her was Bianca. She was the center of gravity in the room, dripping in silver and diamonds. Around her neck hung the sterling sapphire, a massive, deep blue stone surrounded by diamonds. It was a family heirloom that Victoria had sworn would be mine on our 10th anniversary. Seeing it on Bianca's neck, resting against her skin, felt like a physical slap, but Bianca wasn't glowing, even through the grainy camera feed. I could see her complexion was chalky. She kept shifting her weight from foot to foot, her smile tight and strained. And then there was Preston, my husband. He was standing by the bar, gripping a glass of whiskey as if it were a life raft. He looked terrifyingly handsome in his tuxedo, but he was sweating, not the dewy glow of health, but the slick, oily sheen of physiological distress. He kept dabbing his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. I checked my watch. 7:15. The biological countdown was entering its final phase. The magnesium citrate had done its work, pulling liters of fluid into their intestines. The bicicotal was now stimulating the smooth muscle walls, triggering the peristaltic waves that would soon become tsunamis, and for Victoria and Preston, the furosemide was filling their bladders at an impossible rate. I adjusted the strap of my bag and smoothed the silk of my emerald gown. It was time to move closer. I slipped through the side garden gate and entered the house through the service entrance. Moving silently toward the grand staircase, on the screen, I watched the drama unfold in real time. At 7:30, the first cracks appeared. Victoria was speaking to the wife of a bank CEO. Suddenly, she stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes went wide, a loud, distinct gurgle audible even over the hum of conversation if you were close enough erupted from her midsection. She laughed nervously, pressing a hand to her stomach. "Oh, excuse me," I imagined her saying. Just a bit of butterflies before the speech. But it wasn't butterflies. It was a battalion of angry chemical reactions. Bianca was faring no better. She had abandoned her post by the door and was now clinging to Preston's arm. She whispered something to him, her face contorted in a grimace. Preston nodded vigorously, his own face a mask of panic. He looked like a man trying to hold back a flood with a paper napkin. The guests were starting to notice. The seamless social ballet was becoming disjointed. People were glancing at the hosts with furrowed brows. Why was Victoria clutching the podium like that? Why was Preston swaying? Why did Bianca look like she was about to faint? I reached the top of the grand staircase. The ballroom was directly below me. I could hear the murmur of the crowd, the clinking of glasses. I paused. This was the point of no return. I could walk away now. I could leave them to their fate and fly to Paris, letting the rumors do the work. I stood in the shadows of the service entrance, my hand hovering over the handle of my suitcase, unable to look away. The narrative I had told myself that I would walk away into the night like a cool, detached Avenger had crumbled the moment the spotlight hit Victoria. I had to watch. It was a compulsion, a dark gravitational pull that kept my feet planted on the marble floor while the taxi idled outside. The meter running up a bill I would happily pay later. This was the opera. And the fat lady wasn't just singing, she was about to explode. The ballroom was hushed, a silence bought with millions of dollars of social capital. Victoria Sterling stood at the lucite podium, bathed in a cone of white light that was meant to make her look angelic but, under the current biological circumstances, only served to highlight the sheen of cold sweat lacquering her forehead. She looked like a wax figure left too close to a fire. "Distinguished guests," Victoria began, her voice tight, vibrating with a frequency of panic that only I and perhaps a few dogs in the neighborhood could hear. "We are gathered here to celebrate not just a merger of portfolios, but a merger of values." She gripped the edges of the podium so hard I expected the plastic to crack. Her knuckles were white, spectral spiders clinging to the lectern for dear life. "The Sterling family," she continued, pausing to take a shallow, terrified breath, has always represented resilience. And then, it happened. It wasn't a subtle noise. It wasn't the polite, muffled rumble of a stomach asking for lunch. It was a geological event, the lavalier microphone clipped to her silk lapel. A piece of high-fidelity German engineering designed to capture the whisper of a breath. Picked up the seismic shift occurring in her transverse colon. The sound blasted through the surround sound speakers, echoing off the vaulted ceilings like the roar of a dying dragon. It was wet. It was angry. It was bass-heavy. Victoria froze. Her eyes, already wide, seemed to detach from reality. She stopped speaking, but her stomach did not. It answered its own call with a high-pitched, squealing squelch that sounded remarkably like a balloon being twisted by a clown. The silence in the room shattered. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. I saw Mrs. Vanderbilt in the front row adjust her hearing aid, looking around as if searching for a wild animal. Victoria's face underwent a fascinating chromatic transformation. The pale alabaster skin I had so carefully maintained with facials turned a stark, bruised gray, then rapidly shifted to a shade of green, usually reserved for cartoon villains or spoiled guacamole. Victoria stammered, her posture curling inward, the involuntary reflex of a body trying to contain a nuclear meltdown. The future is... To her right, Bianca Rouse was trying to maintain the pose of the adoring future daughter-in-law. She was smiling, but it was a rictus of terror. She was swaying, her hands clutching her midsection over the silver sequins of her dress. Standing directly in front of her was Senator Archibald Archie Vance, the senior senator from Connecticut, a man known for his crisp Italian suits and his inability to hold his liquor. He was beaming at Bianca, holding a glass of champagne, completely oblivious to the fact that he was standing in the splash zone. "Are you all right, my dear?" the senator asked, leaning in closer, his voice booming slightly. "You look a bit peaked." Bianca opened her mouth to answer, perhaps to say, "I'm fine," or "Please move." But her pyloric valve had other ideas. The magnesium citrate had reversed the polarity of her digestive tract. She didn't just vomit. She projected. It was a violent, exorcism-level event. A torrent of semi-digested brunch and yellow vitamin cocktail erupted from the heiress of the Rouse fortune, catching Senator Vance squarely in the chest. It splashed across his silk tie, soaked his lapels, and dripped onto his handcrafted loafers. The senator didn't scream immediately. He just stood there, arms raised in a surrender pose, looking down at his chest in pure, unadulterated disbelief, as if he couldn't process that a billionaire's daughter had just treated him like a public toilet. Then, the screaming started. "Oh my God," a woman shrieked. "She's sick. It's a virus." Preston, witnessing his fiancée defile a sitting member of the United States Senate, did what any sterling man would do. He panicked. He lunged forward, presumably to catch Bianca or perhaps to shield the senator, shouting, "Bianca, darling." But the sudden, jerky movement was the catalyst his own compromised system had been waiting for. As he reached out, his foot slipped in the puddle Bianca had created. He windmilled his arms, looking like a drunk conductor, and his core muscles clenched in a desperate attempt to regain balance. That clench was the fatal error. The sound that ripped from Preston was not amplified by a microphone, but it didn't need to be. It was a sharp, tearing noise, like canvas ripping, followed immediately by the heavy, wet slap of fluid hitting the floor. The Xanax had relaxed his inhibitions, and the laxatives had liquefied his dignity. A dark stain bloomed instantly across the seat of his tuxedo trousers, expanding outward with horrifying speed. The smell hit the crowd a second later. It was an olfactory wall, a thick, cloying mixture of sulfur, acid, and raw sewage. It rolled off the stage and crashed into the front row of donors. I watched as the crowd recoiled physically, a wave of diamonds and tuxedos stumbling backward. A woman in a red ball gown gagged openly. pressing a gloved hand to her mouth. A man dropped his champagne glass, the shattering crystal adding a puncturing accent to the chaos. But the centerpiece of this tragedy, the prima ballerina of the bowel movement, was Victoria. She was still clinging to the podium, watching her son soil himself and her future daughter-in-law heave onto a politician. She tried to shout a command, tried to reassert control over her crumbling empire. "Stop," she gasped into the mic. "Everybody, remain," she sneezed. It was a small sneeze, a nothing sneeze, but in her state, it was the pin that popped the grenade. The dam broke. On the high-definition screens flanking the stage, projected for all to see, the audience witnessed the end of Victoria Sterling. Her knees buckled. Her eyes rolled back in her head. And the back of her gold Dior gown, a dress that cost $40,000 and required 3 fittings, turned a deep, muddy brown. It ran down her legs. It pooled around her designer heels. It was absolute, total, and catastrophic evacuation. She collapsed, not in a faint, but in a squatting slide, her hands scrabbling at the podium for purchase, dragging it down with her. The microphone screeched with feedback as it hit the floor, amplifying the wet, squelching sounds of her misery. "Mother!" Preston yelled, crawling toward her on hands and knees, slipping and sliding in the filth, a tragic figure in a tuxedo that was now ruined from the inside out. "Don't touch me!" Victoria shrieked, batting at him, her voice cracking. "You idiot! Look what you've done!" "Me!" Preston cried, his voice high and hysterical. "You made us drink that cocktail. You said it would make us glow." "I'm burning," Bianca wailed from her position on the floor, curled into a fetal ball next to the senator's shoes. "My stomach is on fire! Help me!" The scene on the stage was a tableau of carnage. 3 people, dressed in the height of fashion, writhing in a pool of their own biological waste, screaming accusations at each other while the smell of a sewer enveloped the room. The guests were no longer just backing away. They were fleeing. It was a stampede of the 1%. Elderly socialites were hurdling chairs. Tech bros were pushing past waitstaff. The exit doors were jammed with people trying to escape the miasma. But amidst the fleeing crowd, a small group held their ground. The press, the photographers Victoria had personally invited, the videographers from the society blogs, the cameraman from the local news affiliate she had bribed to cover the event they were not running. They were zooming in. This was the scoop of the century. This wasn't just a gossip item. This was the fall of Rome, captured in 4K resolution. Flash, flash, flash. The strobe lights of the cameras popped like fireworks, illuminating the horror in disjointed, brutal bursts. Click, Victoria on all fours, her face a mask of agony and shame. Click, Bianca vomiting again, her diamonds trailing in the mess. Click, Preston weeping, holding his stomach, his pants destroyed. It was grotesque. It was a dark comedy written by a sadist. And I stood there, my hand gripping the cold metal of my suitcase handle, feeling a laugh bubble up in my chest. It wasn't a maniacal laugh. It was a quiet, incredulous exhale. They looked so small. Without their armor of poise, without the barrier of their perfect health, they were just scared. Sick animals trapped in a cage of their own making. I saw the senator, who had finally recovered from his shock, wiping his lapel with a napkin and looking at the Sterlings with utter revulsion. He turned to his aide and said, loud enough to be heard over the groans of the afflicted, "Cancel the endorsement, cancel the zoning permits, cancel everything. I'm not getting into bed with these people." That was it, the nail in the coffin. The Sterling reputation wasn't just stained, it was incinerated. I took a step forward. The initial plan had been to leave, to let the image speak for itself. But seeing them there, seeing the total vacuum of leadership, seeing the crowd looking for an explanation, I realized the script needed an epilogue. They needed a narrator to close the book. I let go of my suitcase. I smoothed the silk of my emerald dress. I checked my reflection in the glass of the French door. Perfect. I wasn't just the pharmacist anymore. I was the cure. And sometimes, the cure is painful. I began to walk toward the stage, my heels clicking on the floor with the precision of a ticking clock. The smell was horrendous, a physical barrier, but I walked through it. I had spent years cleaning up their messes metaphorically. I could handle the literal version for 5 minutes. It was time to introduce myself, not as Kelsey the wife, but as Kelsey the karmic debt collector, and I had come to collect in full. The chaos in the ballroom had curdled into a heavy, suffocating atmosphere of shock and revulsion. The air was thick, a miasma of sour bile and human waste that hung over the room like a physical fog. Guests were pressed against the far walls, covering their mouths with silk handkerchiefs and evening clutches, their eyes wide with the primal horror of witnessing the social elite reduced to leaking. Whimpering animals, into this tableau of devastation, I stepped forward. I had discarded the gray sweater of the servant. I had shed the skin of the obedient pharmacist. I wore a gown of crimson-red silk, a shade so vibrant and violent it looked like a fresh arterial wound against the backdrop of the beige and gold room. It was strapless, structured, and flowed around my legs like liquid fire. I had bought it for this exact moment, for the visual metaphor of being the only living, vibrant thing in a room full of dying reputations. The silence that fell over the room as I approached the stage was different from the silence of horror. It was the silence of confusion, then recognition, then awe. I walked with a steady, predatory rhythm, my heels clicking on the dry patches of the parquet floor. Navigating the puddles of filth with the precision of a dancer, I reached the edge of the stage. The microphone, which Victoria had dragged down with her in her descent, lay on the floor near a puddle of yellow bile. I picked it up. It was sticky. I didn't care. I tapped the head of the mic. Thump, thump. The sound boomed through the speakers, causing Preston to flinch violently where he lay curled in the fetal position. "Is everyone enjoying the show?" I asked. My voice was calm. It was the voice of a doctor delivering a diagnosis, stripped of empathy, stating cold, hard facts. It echoed off the vaulted ceiling, cutting through the whimpers of the afflicted. Victoria looked up at me. She was a ruin. Her gold Dior gown was stained black at the back. Her makeup was streaked with sweat and tears, and her hair, usually a helmet of hairspray, was matted to her skull. She looked at me with eyes that held no recognition, only pain. "Kelsey," she rasped, her voice a wet gargle. "Water. Please, water." "I wouldn't recommend water, Victoria," I said. My voice amplified to every corner of the room. "You have already ingested quite a bit of magnesium. Water will only accelerate the osmotic effect. You will just explode again," Preston groaned, rolling onto his back. His tuxedo was destroyed. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading, the eyes of a dog that had been kicked. "Kels," he wept. "What is happening? Did you poison us? I feel like I am dying. Help me. Please." I looked down at him. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of folding his socks, managing his anxiety, covering his lies, and now, seeing him lying there in his own filth. I felt absolutely nothing, no pity, no love, not even hate, just a clinical satisfaction. "I didn't poison you, Preston," I replied, addressing the room as much as him. "Poison implies I wanted to kill you. I am a pharmacist. I took an oath to do no harm. I simply facilitated a cleanse." I walked closer to them, towering over their prone forms. "You wanted a radiance protocol, didn't you, Victoria? You wanted to purge the bad energy. You wanted to be pure. So, I swapped your vitamin B12 and your collagen peptides for a high-dose slurry of magnesium citrate and bisacodil. About 80 milligrams of stimulant laxative, to be precise." A collective gasp went through the remaining crowd. A few people laughed a nervous, hysterical sound. "Consider it a biological exorcism," I continued. "You threw out my clothes because you said they held stagnant energy. You treated me like a disease in this house. Well, now you know what it feels like to have your body reject what is inside it. You are literally full of shit, and I just helped you let it all go." "You bitch!" Bianca shrieked from the floor. She was trying to wipe the vomit from her chin with the hem of her silver dress. "I'm pregnant. You could have killed the baby." I turned my gaze to Bianca. "Oh, stop it," I said dismissively. "Bisacodyl is a Category C drug. It causes cramping, not miscarriage. The baby is fine, though, judging by the genetics involved, the poor thing is destined to be an asshole regardless of what I do. But you might want to worry less about your stomach and more about your bank account." I reached into the bodice of my red dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't the financial report. It was a printout of a news article that was set to break on the wire services in exactly 10 minutes. "You see?" I said, turning to the crowd, holding the paper up. "The Sterling family has been banking, pun intended, on this merger to save them from total insolvency. They are broke. The house is mortgaged 3 times over. Preston's investment firm is a shell company used to shuffle debt." Preston squeezed his eyes shut. Victoria let out a low moan, burying her face in the floor. "But here is the fun part," I said, walking to the edge of the stage to address the shocked investors and politicians directly. They thought Bianca Rouse was their savior. They thought the Rouse oil money was clean. But I did a little digging during my lunch breaks. It turns out, Bianca's father, Carter Rouse, isn't just an oil tycoon. He is currently the subject of a massive federal investigation for laundering cartel money through offshore drilling contracts. The room erupted. The journalists, who had been snapping photos, suddenly started typing furiously on their phones. "That's a lie," Bianca screamed, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" I asked. "I have the subpoenas right here. The FBI froze the Rouse assets at 9 o'clock this morning. That means the $50 million the Sterlings were expecting, it doesn't exist. You aren't merging with a fortune." "Victoria, you are merging with a federal indictment." Victoria looked at me, her face crumbling. The realization hit her harder than the laxatives. The money was gone. The reputation was gone. The social standing she had sacrificed her humanity to maintain was gone. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" "Because you threw out my mother's scarf," I said simply, "and because I got tired of being the only one swallowing your pill." I reached into my bag, which I had left at the foot of the stairs, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I walked back to Preston. He was trying to sit up, but the cramps knocked him back down. I dropped the envelope on his chest. It landed with a heavy thud. "What is this?" he wheezed. "Divorce papers," I said. "I signed them this morning. The terms are simple. I get everything that I brought into the marriage which you threw in the trash, so you will be reimbursing me the replacement value, roughly $40,000. I also want my name removed from any joint liabilities immediately, and I want sole custody of— Oh wait, we don't have children. Thank God." "I won't sign," Preston spat, trying to muster some shred of defiance. "I'll sue you. I'll sue you for poisoning us. I'll have your license. I'll destroy you." I laughed. It was a genuine, full-throated laugh that felt amazing. "Go ahead. Preston, sue me," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "But before you dial Harrison Thorne, you should know that I made copies of everything, the offshore accounts, the tax evasion schemes, and most importantly, the 5 years of medical records documenting your abuse of prescription narcotics, which I enabled and managed." Preston went pale. "I have logs of every Xanax you popped," I said. "I have records of Victoria's illegal hormone injections. I have proof that you have been driving under the influence of sedatives for years. If you drag me into court, I won't just take your money, I will put you in prison. And trust me, they don't have private bathrooms in federal penitentiaries." I stepped back, looking at the 3 of them, the mother, the son, the mistress writhing in the wreckage of their own hubris. They were broken, they were bankrupt, and they were covered in filth. "It seems I'm not family anymore," I said, echoing the words I had said to myself 1,000 times, "which is a relief, because your family is toxic, and I am done being the antidote." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a screech of feedback that made everyone flinch. I turned my back on them. I walked through the silent crowd, the crimson silk of my dress swishing around my ankles. The guests parted for me as if I were royalty. They looked at me with a mixture of terror and respect. I wasn't the help anymore. I was the one who held the keys to the kingdom, and I had just locked the doors and burned it down. I reached the double doors at the back of the ballroom. I didn't look back at the stage. I didn't need to see them to know they were finished. I could hear the sobbing. I could smell the ruin. I stepped out into the cool night air of Connecticut. The valet was waiting with my taxi. He looked at me, wide-eyed, having heard the screams from inside. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked. I looked down at my red dress. Not a drop of mess on it, not a wrinkle. "I'm better than okay," I said, handing him a $20 bill. "I'm cured." I got into the taxi. "JFK," I told the driver, "and step on it. I have a new life to catch." As the car pulled away, I watched the Sterling estate disappear in the rearview mirror. The lights were still on, blazing in the darkness, a shining monument to a rot that had finally been exposed to the air. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't smell fear. I didn't smell compromise. I smelled victory, and it smelled like expensive perfume and jet fuel. The tires of the taxi crunched over the gravel of the Sterling driveway for the last time. A sound that felt like the closing of a heavy book. I rolled down the window, letting the cool Connecticut air rush in to replace the cloying, acrid scent of the ballroom. As we turned onto the main road, a cacophony of sirens shattered the night. I twisted in my seat to look back. 3 ambulances were racing toward the estate, their red and blue strobe lights cutting through the darkness, painting the manicured hedges in spasms of emergency color. They were coming to treat dehydration, shock, and bruised egos, but there was no medical intervention in the world that could resuscitate the Sterling reputation. I leaned back against the worn leather seat of the cab. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm, distinct from the frantic flutter of anxiety that had defined my life for the past 5 years. I checked my phone. It was buzzing incessantly with notifications from the security app I had deleted. Ghost signals trying to reach a device that no longer cared. I turned the phone over in my hand, contemplating tossing it out the window, when a new message banner slid across the top of the screen. It was from an unknown number with a Texas area code. Curiosity, that old professional hazard, made me open it. The text was long, formal, and devastatingly precise. "Ms. Hartman, this is Tobias Wright, personal assistant to Mr. Carter Rouse. Mr. Rouse was watching the live stream of the gala to monitor the public announcement of the merger. He asked me to convey his personal gratitude. Seeing the reality of the Sterling family's financial and physical constitution has been illuminating. The transfer of the bridge loan, which was scheduled for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, has been canceled. Mr. Rouse does not invest in sinking ships, and he certainly does not invest in ones that are leaking. He wishes you the best of luck in your future endeavors. You seem to be the only competent person in that household." I stared at the screen, a bubble of laughter rising in my throat. It was the final twist of the knife. The Sterlings had endured the humiliation, the vomit, and the public shaming, clinging to the desperate hope that the Rouse money would still come through to save them from bankruptcy. They probably thought they could spin this, blame it on food poisoning, and still sign the papers in the morning. But I had killed the deal. By forcing them to show their true selves weak, sick, and out of control, I had scared off the only lifeline they had. The Rouse fortune, tainted as it might be by federal investigations, was the only thing keeping the bank from foreclosing on the mansion. And now, thanks to a little magnesium citrate and a lot of hubris, that money was gone. The drive to John F. Kennedy International Airport took an hour, but it felt like a minute. I spent the time deleting contacts. Victoria, deleted. Preston, deleted. The house landline, deleted. With every name I erased, I felt lighter, as if I were dropping sandbags from a hot air balloon. I boarded the red-eye flight to Paris with nothing but a carry-on bag and a dress that smelled of victory. I slept for 7 hours straight, a deep, dreamless sleep that I had not experienced since my wedding day. By the time I landed at Charles de Gaulle, the internet had done what the internet does best. It had turned tragedy into content. I sat in the airport lounge, sipping a cappuccino, scrolling through the headlines on my tablet. The New York Post had gone with a full front-page photo of Victoria Sterling slipping in the mess on stage. The headline, in bold block letters, read, "Gala of grown society queens flushed away." It was brutal, it was visceral, and it was everywhere. Videos of the incident had gone viral on every platform. There were remixes of Victoria's microphone-amplified stomach noises set to dubstep music. There were memes of Preston slipping in the puddle with the caption, "When the check bounces, and so do you." The hashtag Sterling Spill was trending #1 globally, beating out major geopolitical events. The article detailed the aftermath. The guests had fled so quickly that the valet stand was overwhelmed, and socialites were seen running down the driveway in their heels to escape the smell. The hazmat team had to be called in to clean the ballroom. The health department had shut down the catering company pending an investigation. Although the company was loudly proclaiming their innocence and pointing fingers at the rogue pharmacist, but the real damage was in the financial section. Because I had leaked the documents about the mortgage default and the tax evasion to the press before I left. The story wasn't just about a bad dinner, it was about fraud. It was about a family that had been living a lie for a decade. The Wall Street Journal ran a piece titled, "The Sterling House of Cards Collapses." It detailed how the bank, seeing the public disaster and the failed merger, had immediately called in the loans. The article confirmed what the text message had told me: the Rouse deal was dead. The fallout was swift and absolute. It was social suicide on a scale that hadn't been seen since the French Revolution, only instead of a guillotine, it was a laxative. I closed the tablet and boarded my connecting train to the city center. I didn't need to read any more. I knew the ending of that story. I spent the next 6 months building a new one. Paris suited me. It was a city that respected chemistry, that understood that the difference between a poison and a cure was often just the dosage. I used the money from my personal savings, the funds Preston hadn't been able to steal, because I had kept them in a separate, high-yield account under my maiden name to lease a small, charming storefront in the Marais district. I didn't open a pharmacy. That felt too clinical, too sterile. I opened a high-end wellness consultancy called Veritas. Truth, I formulated custom botanical blends, created personalized skincare regimens based on actual science rather than marketing fluff, and offered nutritional counseling for the elite of Paris. The difference was that here, I was the boss. I wasn't the daughter-in-law in the basement. I was the expert in the white coat. My clients were wealthy, yes. They were demanding, certainly. But they treated me with a reverence that the Sterlings never had. They listened to me. They paid my invoices on time. And they never, ever asked me to fetch them tea. One rainy afternoon in November, 6 months after the gala, I was sitting at a small round table outside a cafe near the Seine. The awning protected me from the drizzle. I had a glass of Bordeaux in front of me and my iPad propped up against the sugar shaker. I had made a habit of checking the Boston news once a month. Just a quick check-in, like glancing at a scar to make sure it was fading properly. Today, the headline made me pause. Historic Sterling estate in Greenwich sold at bankruptcy auction. I clicked on the article. The photo showed the mansion, but it looked different. The ivy was overgrown. The windows looked dark and hollow. The caption noted that the property had been seized by the bank 3 months prior and was sold yesterday for a fraction of its estimated value to a developer who planned to subdivide the land into luxury condos. The article went on to describe the fate of the family. Victoria Sterling, the once great doyenne of society, had retreated into total seclusion. She was living in a small 2-bedroom apartment in a neighboring town. Rumor had it she refused to leave her house and had developed a severe phobia of public dining. She had been scrubbed from every charity board, every committee, every social register. The radiance she had so desperately wanted had become a radioactive half-life of shame. And Preston. The article mentioned him briefly. He was currently facing charges for fraud and embezzlement related to his investment firm. The evidence I had provided, the logs, the offshore accounts, the tax records had been a goldmine for the district attorney. He was out on bail, but his passport had been surrendered. As for Bianca Rouse, the future of the family, I did a quick search for her name. The results were pathetic. She had returned to Texas 2 days after the gala. She gave an exclusive interview to a tabloid magazine titled My Nightmare with the Sterlings, in which she claimed she was a victim of their deception. She stated that the engagement was broken off immediately. There was no mention of the baby. I suspected that without the Sterling name attached to it, the heir was no longer a strategic asset worth keeping, or perhaps the pregnancy had been an exaggeration all along. Either way, Preston and Bianca had destroyed each other, dissolving their union in a pool of acid and regret. I looked at the photo of the mansion again. I zoomed in on the window of the master bedroom on the second floor. I remembered the Louis Vuitton trunks at the foot of the bed. I remembered the way Victoria had looked at me when she told me my clothes were in the trash. I remembered the feeling of being small, of being erased, of being told that my energy was stagnant. I took a sip of the Bordeaux. It was rich, complex, and tasted of the earth. I had lost my wardrobe that day. I had lost my mother's scarf. I had lost 5 years of my life to people who saw me as an appliance. But looking at the news of their total annihilation, I realized what I had gained. I had gained my freedom. I had gained my self-respect. And I had gained the absolute, unshakable knowledge that I was a force of nature. I scrolled down to the comments section of the article. It was filled with people mocking the family, making jokes about the brown wedding, and celebrating the downfall of corrupt aristocrats. One comment caught my eye. It was from a user named Greenwich Insider. I heard the ex-wife was the one who blew the whistle. She walked out of there in a red dress like she had just lit the match. Legend. I smiled. A real smile. One that reached my eyes. I wasn't a legend. I was just a pharmacist who knew how to balance an equation. They had subtracted my dignity, so I subtracted their future. It was simple math. I closed the iPad and signaled the waiter for the check. Everything was good. Madame? He asked in French. Yes, I replied in perfect French, a language I had learned in my spare time during those lonely nights in the Sterling guest room. Everything is perfect. I paid the bill and stood up. I wrapped my new coat around me, a trench coat I had bought in a boutique on the Champs-Élysées, one that was far more stylish than the beige one Victoria had thrown away. I walked to the edge of the river and looked down at the gray water of the Seine flowing past. It was moving, constantly changing, washing away the dirt of the city and carrying it out to the ocean. Clean from the inside out, I whispered to the water. I turned and walked away, the heels of my boots clicking on the cobblestones. I had a consultation at 4 with a duchess who wanted to know about natural sleep aids. I wouldn't recommend warm milk. I would recommend honesty. It helps you sleep much better at night. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long journey from the basement of the Sterling mansion to the streets of Paris. But I'm glad I could share the truth with you. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you in your car, at work, or maybe relaxing at home with a cup of tea, hopefully one you made yourself? Please leave a comment down below and tell me your location and what you would have done if your in-laws threw out your clothes. I read every single one of them, and if you enjoyed watching the Sterlings get a taste of their own medicine, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Family Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to help us grow, and smash that hype button so this story can be recommended to more people who need a little reminder that sometimes the best revenge is served cold, or in this case, extremely liquid. Until next time, stay healthy and always check your labels.